Hi everyone, welcome back to another episode of Talks in Class. My name is Jenna. Thank you so much for joining me today. So happy to have you here for another episode. It is almost July. I can't believe that actually. Summer's just flying by, and I know a lot of people kind of all over the country have been really feeling it lately. There's been heat waves everywhere and everybody's just talking about how hot it is. So actually today's episode is kind of perfect for this point in the summer. And I wish that I could say that I've been doing more summer activities, but honestly, I really haven't. I have been trying to get outside as much as I can. I went to the pool a couple times, which is nice. I may try to get to the beach at some point this summer, but as you guys know, I mentioned this last week, I've been kind of on this organization spree. So last weekend, I successfully organized all of my props, shoes, accessories, bags, hats, basically everything that I use in my throwback videos that aren't clothes. I organized into a couple of different cabinets, so now I can see everything. I know where everything is. It is a big improvement. Now I have to tackle the actual clothes, so I think I'm going to do that this weekend, but then it'll all be organized. It's such a nice project. A little bit delayed on the spring cleaning, I guess, but a good feeling either way. And I am going home to Wisconsin to visit my mom in a couple of weeks, right after the 4th of July. So I will be doing lots of summer activities there because in the Midwest, everything is crammed into the summer. So the summer feels really exciting, but also very busy. So there's a lot going on. I will also be there for my hometown festival. So that will be quite an experience because I have not been home for that in over 10 years. So I will get my dose of summer fun in a couple of weeks. Until then, I don't know, I guess I'll just be organizing 20-year-old clothes. So as always, I will start this episode with my what good happened. And aside from feeling very accomplished about my organizational projects that I did last weekend, I will say my what could happen this week is that I got invited to an event, and it's actually tonight. I don't go to a lot of events as a content creator or influencer, whatever you want to call it. I've mentioned this before, but I guess it's just not really it's not the kind of content that I create. I think a lot of people who create more lifestyle content do go to a lot of events because brands that are in the beauty space in particular seem to have a lot of events. So I don't know, for whatever reason, I don't go to a lot of events. So it's always fun when I do go to them because typically they have a really fun theme. And this one is no different. It is an event for Netflix. It's for that 90s show, the part 2 of that series. So clearly it will be 90s themed, which I'm really excited about. Obviously I picked out a fun outfit, which is probably my favorite part. So it'll be fun. And you know, it's always nice to get out of the house when you work from home by yourself. So for this week's episode, we are continuing with my nostalgic summer movie rewind series with a movie that I think is probably the most summer feeling movie on this entire list of any movie that I can think of. This one probably feels the most like summertime to me, and not just that, but a movie that I think so beautifully captures the feeling and kind of the magic of being a kid on summer vacation, and that is The Sandlot. When you think of quintessential summer things, there are probably a few things that come to mind instantly for most of us. A pool or a beach, some sort of water, an ice cream cone or a popsicle, a hot dog, fireworks, or just 4th of July in general, and also baseball. Even as a very girly girl growing up with no brothers or really any male influence in my day-to-day life, baseball always just felt like summer to me. And I did grow up basically on the property of my high school. Like, our house was so close to the school. And back in my day, the baseball field was essentially right next to our house. I mean, it was right outside the windows was the baseball field, like to the point where it wasn't uncommon at all to hear baseballs hitting the side of our house pretty regularly during the summer. So baseball was literally the soundtrack of my summers growing up. There was a game basically every night, or I mean, it felt like there was a game basically every night. And because we lived so close to the baseball field, we could always hear the announcers and the crowd. It was just sort of like white noise in my house growing up during the summertime. And I got to thinking about this the other day when I was making my list of summer movies, because I think The Sandlot is one of the most nostalgic summer movies that I can think of for me. Everything about it just literally feels like summer. It transports me back to summer, and it instantly puts me in a good mood because it reminds me of that feeling of being on summer break as a kid. And I loved it so much growing up. I watched it over and over and over. I mean, my friends and I had a few movies that we had on pretty much repeat, and this was one of them. And it wasn't just because my friends and I were somewhat obsessed with Benny, although we were, obviously, as middle school girls. But I guess just because it really does capture that feeling of being a kid in the summertime just so well. And I was thinking about this the other day before I rewatched it, because it's kind of funny when you think about it now. Like, I was a very girly child. I loved Barbies. I loved my American Girl dolls. I loved, I don't know, Pretty Princess. I loved the Spice Girls. I wasn't a sports girly, okay? Like, I did not enjoy playing sports at all. I think I played softball for like 5 minutes one summer in the little kids, like town softball league. I remember I really wanted to play softball. I wanted to like playing softball because all of my friends were in it. So, they were at softball practice multiple days in the week, and I wasn't, so I was kind of by myself. So I tried it, and it was it was just not for me. I've said this before, but when it came to sports, I just needed to stay in my lane, okay? Which was activities without any sort of ball involved. No catching, no throwing, definitely no batting. It wasn't my thing. I didn't even really like kickball, if I'm being honest. Like, kicking that giant, somewhat soft, non-threatening ball, even that was too much pressure for me in gym class. So it was not for me. I did track and dance, solo sports that didn't involve throwing or kicking anything. So anyway, the point is, baseball was obviously not my thing. Sports in general were not my summer activity of choice. Going to the pool all day was more my summer activity of choice personally, but regardless, I absolutely loved The Sandlot, despite it being, on the surface, a movie entirely about baseball. But like so many other things, upon a rewatch, I realized it is really so much more than that. It's really about being a kid. It's about being a kid, and I think it captures that experience so perfectly in so many ways. And watching it as an adult, it feels like a movie for kids, but not in that sort of talking down sort of way that sometimes happens with media made for kids. It actually feels like a movie that kids would like. Like, instead of a movie that adults think kids would like, if that makes sense, it's a movie that feels like kids would genuinely like it. So if you have somehow not seen this film, or you just need a little refresher, because I get it, it's been a while, The Sandlot is about a group of kids. I think they're probably supposed to be in like late elementary school or early middle school. I would guess around 6th grade if I had to. And it's funny because when I rewatched it, I could not figure out how old these kids were supposed to be. Benny definitely feels much older than Scotty Smalls, for example. And Squints looks like he's 8 years old. I don't know. If my best guess would be middle school. And I do remember that when I watched this as a kid, I just always assumed they were my age, whatever that meant. Kind of like when you meet another adult as an adult, you just kind of assume that they're basically your age unless there's something that tells me otherwise. So we'll just go with middle school. They all live together in a neighborhood somewhere in the San Fernando Valley. The movie was made in 1993, but it was set in the summer of 1962. And since the internet loves to use math to attack us millennials, a movie that was made in 1993 that takes place in 1962 would be like a movie made in 2024 that takes place in 1993. So, me watching The Sandlot as a kid with my mom, and her commenting on things like the signs at the hardware store that they go to in the little movie, or the glass bottles that they drink their soda from, and telling me that she remembered those things from her childhood, is just like me telling kids today how much we loved, I don't know, Capri Suns and gel pens and stuff with dolphins on it in the 90s. And I was thinking about this so much when I was watching the movie, how I had this obsession with the 60s as a kid. Like, I think that has influenced me so much, even into adulthood. In my tastes, I still really gravitate towards 60s and like early 70s aesthetics, whether it's home decor or fashion or even just colors in general. And watching The Sandlot now, I mean, 1962 obviously feels like ages ago. It feels like truly another time. But I do remember as a kid feeling like it wasn't that long ago. Like, obviously it was the past, but it was still almost within reach. You know what I mean? Like, there were still glimpses of that world that you could see in the world that I lived in. I remember there was this soda bottling place near us when I was growing up, and you could get soda in those old glass bottles, and you would pick them up in these wooden kind of crate things. But I don't remember the details, but the catch essentially was that you couldn't get any more bottles than what you already had. So you kind of had to be grandfathered in. Nobody new could come in there and buy soda in glass bottles. You had to bring your bottles back and then you could get your bottles. So for whatever reason, my mom had two of these wooden cases of soda, probably 12 bottles each or something. So whenever we would go drop off the bottles, you would return them and then you could pick up more. We could only get 2 cases worth of soda. We couldn't get any more. It was just those 2 cases. But I don't know. It sounds crazy now, but these were those little glimpses, you know, there were still these little pieces of that world, little glimpses of a time gone by that you could still experience in certain ways back then, which is of course now true of the 90s. When we look back, like your grandparents or your parents might still have a landline with an old white cordless phone sitting in the kitchen. You can still get a disposable camera developed. You know, these are the little pieces of the world that I knew as a kid that are now still hanging on in 2024. But there's nothing left of the world that my parents knew as a kid anymore. And if there is, it's like in a museum, you know, or if you see a classic car, it's at a classic car show. It's not like parked on the side of the road. Although sometimes in LA you will see a really classic car just parked on the side of the road, which is kind of cool. And we know that The Sandlot takes place in another world because in it, our main character, Scotty Smalls, moves to the valley with his mother and his stepfather, and this cute little family of 3 buys a whole ass house in the valley on 1 income. Okay. 31 years later in 2024, the average home price in Sherman Oaks, California is $1.4 million. So stepdad Bill would not only have to sell that Babe Ruth autographed baseball, but mom would also need a job, and honestly, Scott would probably never have met Benny and the gang because he would have been inside on his phone, probably trying to monetize his TikTok account so he could buy some, I don't know, Prime drinks and Crocs to wear with tall socks. I don't know. I don't know what middle schoolers are into these days. The point is, it was another world. So Scotty Smalls, his mother, and his stepdad, Bill, move to the valley, and Scotty doesn't have any friends in the neighborhood, but he notices this group of kids, roughly his age, who play baseball every day in a field that they refer to as the Sandlot. And this group, naturally being a 90s kids movie, consists of quite a cast of characters. First, we have Benjamin Franklin Rodriguez, the unofficial leader of the group, and a large number of millennials around my age first crush, or one of them anyway. I think for me it was Devon Sawa in Little Giants, another great 90s sports movie. Andrew Keegan in Camp Nowhere, also a great 90s summer movie. And Benny from The Sandlot. That was the trifecta for little middle school Jenna or like late elementary school Jenna. Benny is cool, he's great at baseball, and most importantly, he's the only one that's actually nice to Scotty Smalls from the beginning of the movie. Next is Michael Squints Palladores, a small, kind of nerdy kid with an unreasonable amount of confidence, honestly. But that also sort of is the charm of Squints. Squints is one of the comic relief characters of the group, obviously. And then there is Hamilton Porter, the designated fat friend, because you always needed to have a fat friend in any kids movie from the 80s or the 90s, who they literally call Ham. Little on the nose, but okay. Ham is also very funny. Especially the scene where they challenge the kids from the more organized baseball team in town, and Ham spends the entire time spewing the funniest insults at him. Honestly, Even rewatching this as an adult, that scene is so funny. It's really, really well done, and that kid is genuinely funny. I will say all the kids in this movie are really, really good, and that is difficult. But this kid, he's funny. But as a kid, I mean, that was next level. I don't think I had ever laughed as hard as when Ham told one of those kids, if I had a dog that was as ugly as you, I would shave its butt and teach it to walk backwards. And this is what I mean when I say it feels like a kid's movie for kids. It feels like a movie that a kid would come up with rather than a movie made for kids through an adult lens. Because, I mean, that's something that a middle school boy absolutely would say to somebody and think was the funniest insult on the planet. I mean, I was a middle school girl and I did think it was the funniest insult on the planet, so. Ham is also responsible for probably the most famous, most quotable line from the entire movie, which of course is when he tells Scotty, "You're killing me, Smalls," which I of course quoted every chance that I possibly got to all of my little middle school friends. Then we have Alan, aka Yeah, because he always says yeah instead of just yeah. Then we have Kenny, Bertram, and the twins, Timmy and Tommy. And then with Smalls, that makes 9 of them. And the first half of the movie is really just kind of a fun hangout movie that follows kids around as they go about their day. They play baseball at the Sandlot. Scotty asks his stepfather to teach him how to play catch in the backyard, and he's really bad. The kids go to the hardware store in town. And 2 of the most memorable scenes of the movie, for me anyway, come before kind of the action of the movie truly starts. The kids going to the pool and the kids going to the local carnival. And once again, it's really funny that these are 2 of easily the most memorable scenes to me because neither one of them has to do with baseball, and really that's what this movie's supposed to be about. But it just goes to show that this is a summer movie. It's a movie about kids in the summertime more so than anything else. And scenes like these 2 really captured something special about being a kid in the summer. And I think a lot of it really rings true for me as a kid growing up in the 90s, especially because like the kids in the Sandlot, we were unattended most of the time. We were by ourselves. And part of that was it being the 90s, of course. The world was obviously very different 30 years ago. We were allowed to do things that kids today would never, ever be allowed to do, and it was totally normal, and no one thought twice about it. But on top of that, I also grew up in a really small town where everyone just knew everybody, so the whole town sort of looked out for each other's kids, like, unofficially. Do you know what I mean? Like, if you were riding your bike around town, you weren't just some random kid on a bike. Most of the people that you saw or whose houses you passed, they knew you and they knew your parents. So you were alone, but not really. Like, there were eyes on you. But the important part was that we felt independent because we were doing things on our own. We went to the pool, we rode our bikes to each other's houses all around town, or to the park, or to the store to buy some sugary candy. We got into mild mischief, and most importantly, no one cared about this mild mischief. So we see the Sandlot kids get into a bit of mild mischief in the first part of the movie. Warm-up mischief, if you will, considering the entire second half of the movie is dedicated to trying to get out of their more serious mischief. And one of these scenes, of course, is the pool scene. Again, so quotable and just so funny, so memorable. Since it is summer and they live in the valley, it is very hot outside and it's too hot even to play baseball. So the kids decide to skip out on their baseball game for the day and go to the local pool to cool off, I guess. But mostly because Wendy Peppercorn is the lifeguard. And we get a quick glimpse of Wendy in an earlier scene of the kids outside the hardware store, and she walks by, and I swear when I rewatched it, I was like, this woman is 35 years old. Like, she is not a child. She's way older than them. And Squints is not only obsessed with her as a kid, obsessed enough that he jumps off the diving board into the deep end even though he can't swim and pretends to drown. But we also find out at the end of the movie that Squints ends up marrying Wendy and they have a bunch of kids. And I mean, I definitely didn't think much of this when I watched this as a kid, but it really seems like she's much older than them. And I get that girls matured faster than boys, but they're supposed to be like, what, 12? I mean, maybe 13 if we're really stretching it, even though Squints does look like one of the youngest of the group. If they are different ages, he's the younger side for sure. Wendy's a lifeguard at the pool, so I would assume she has to be like 16 at least, but she looks like she's 25. But I mean, okay, I guess if Squints is 12 and Wendy is 16, then that's a 4-year difference. So whatever. Sure, it's conceivable, I guess. But again, brilliant kids movie because I did not care. I didn't give this a second thought. I never once even thought about it when I watched it as a kid because this scene is funny and it's memorable, and Squints marrying Wendy in the end gives them a happy ending, and that's what we want as kids when we watch movies, even though Squints does get kicked out of the pool for life for essentially assaulting Wendy that day. I mean, tricking her into making out with him, and he's what, 12? A 12-year-old. But it was the 90s. And because it was the 90s and this is a 90s movie, this is a funny, almost heartwarming scene where he kind of assaults the lifeguard. And let me tell you, if I was 16 years old and some 12-year-old pretended to drown to make out with me, I would be pissed too, okay? I actually laughed so hard when I rewatched this because when she figures out what he's doing and she gets so mad and she kicks him out of the pool and she screams, "Little pervert!" And that's just so funny. It feels so real. I think that's exactly what a lot of people would do in that situation. The pool scene also gives us some other great moments and quotes, like when Ham does a cannonball and splashes all the women lounging on the side of the pool because obviously the chubby friend has to, do a cannonball. Or when Squints is being kind of hypnotized by Wendy putting sunscreen on and keeps repeating, lotioning, oiling, lotioning, oiling. Or, I don't know why I find this line so funny, but when Squints is pulled out of the pool after jumping into the deep end, I think it's Bertram, he says, he looks like a dead fish. And I still laughed so hard. I think it's just the delivery of the line. It's so funny to me. And of course, the fact that they say they go to the pool because of pool honeys. And this is a great aspect of it too. These kids kind of had their own language, saying things like pool honeys and bacon like a toasted cheeser. And then they have these stories that they tell, like this legend of this mythical junkyard dog. It's so real. It really is what it was like to be a kid. The kids get into a bit more mischief before the big pickle that they ultimately land in when they go to the town 4th of July Carnival and decide to dabble in a little chewing tobacco, to be like the pro baseball players. This may seem a little inappropriate for a kids movie, but let's remember, once again, this was the 90s and we had a chewing gum literally marketed to children called Big League Chew. And it came in a little pouch and it was shredded up pieces of chewing gum made to look like bubblegum flavored pink chewing tobacco. And also we had candy cigarettes, so. Anyway, the kids each throw in a giant dip and promptly decide to go on a carnival ride, something that spins around a lot. And obviously this does not go well. They get sick, they throw up everywhere. And I mean, this scene is funny, but it was hard to watch as an adult. The graphic it's a little graphic. Honestly, it was a lot. But it's such a funny scene, and I think part of what makes it so funny and so fun to watch as an adult is that this is something some dumb middle school boys would do. I mean, this is something that the boys I went to middle school with 100% would have done, thinking they looked really cool, and then they end up throwing up all over strangers in public. Like, that's what growing up is all about. That is what childhood mischief is all about. And I can't say that I ever knew anyone who did this. However, I did have a friend once throw up, violently, by the way, throw up all over my bathroom one night in high school because he decided to try some chewing tobacco, which I assume he had never done before, or at least didn't do regularly because it made him projectile vomit, and we happened to be at my house, all over my bathroom. I mean, he couldn't even hit the toilet, and I don't remember exactly what happened, but I'm pretty sure I made him clean it up because there was no way I was cleaning that up, and I didn't want to get in trouble for it. So the poor kid had to scrub his grisly scented vomit off of the bathroom floor like moments after he threw up everywhere. But you know what? You live, you learn. Probably the last time he did that. So eventually, after all of this warm-up mischief, we arrive at the central conflict of the story, the big pickle that the kids get themselves into. Benny hits a ball so hard that he basically explodes the baseball, which means that they no longer can play. Scotty Smalls, our clueless main character, announces to the group that while he does not have 98 extra cents lying around to buy a new ball, he does have a baseball at home. So he runs on home and he swipes his stepdad Bill's Babe Ruth autographed ball from his office, and the game resumes. I guess nobody looked at the ball because if they did, they would see it, but I digress. Also, I should mention that all the kids are obsessed with Babe Ruth and they mention him constantly, but they refer to him using a host of nicknames like the King of Crash, the Sultan of Swat, the Colossus of Klaus, the Great Bambino, all of these things. But Scotty does not know who he is because he is clueless and he is silly and he only plays baseball because he just wants some friends. Okay, so silly little Scotty Smalls brings an autographed baseball out to a pit of dirt and they play with it. Things go from bad to worse when Smalls finally hits his first home run, which goes over the fence into the yard next door. This is a huge deal because up until just earlier this summer, Smalls could barely throw a ball, and now he has hit a home run. But it also means that Smalls is probably going to be murdered by his stepdad when he gets home from his business trip. So Scotty is panicking, especially when he tells the group who signed the ball and finally connects the dots that Babe Ruth is in fact a very significant figure in baseball and he is in fact dead meat. As with most movies I loved as a kid, this is honestly where I lost full interest. I tended to really like the kind of hangout parts of movies a lot more than the action parts of the movies. I liked the parts that helped us understand the characters and their lives, their friendships, their surroundings. I liked those parts so much more than the parts where they actually had to solve a problem. And I guess it's because those parts just kind of felt like hanging out with the characters, like hanging out with your friends. But as an adult, I really do appreciate how the movie handles the action portion. After Smalls hits the ball into the yard next door, it turns from kind of a cute kids comedy into a really fun kind of exaggerated kids action comedy. And again, it just feels straight from the minds of a child. First, Squints has to tell the group the story, the legend rather, of the Beast, the giant monster dog that lives in the yard next door, and how he ate a bunch of kids. They eat s'mores and they try to devise a plan to get the ball back from the Beast without also being eaten. I mean, this is life or death situation here, folks. Even the giant animatronic dog that they use in the reenactment of the kid's story, like what they're imagining the dog to be, it is exactly what a kid would imagine as they're telling their friends some insane campfire story about a 100-year-old junkyard dog that eats children that lives literally on the other side of the fence in your suburban neighborhood. And the plans that they come up with to get the ball back are so funny and so creative. I mean, just so fun. They try to lower a vacuum hose down into the yard, like suck the ball up. They build a contraption out of erector sets to try to pick the ball up. They even try to lower Yaya into the yard from their treehouse on this very elaborate pulley system where Ham is pedaling. I mean, it's crazy. And of course, in the end, they get the ball back after Benny is visited in a dream by Babe Ruth, who tells him that heroes get remembered, but legends never die. And I guess Benny takes this to mean that, you know, if the dog eats him, it'll be fine because at least he'll be a legend. I don't know, but he laces up a new pair of shoes and hops the fence to fetch that ball for Scotty Smalls. And in the process, the dog gets pinned under a fence and he's in danger, so they free him, and then they obviously find out that he's not a vicious killer, but he's actually just a dog who licks their faces. And then they meet the dog's owner, Mr. Myrtle, who is a very nice blind former baseball player who lives next door, and he gives Smalls a ball that is not chewed up and covered in dog drool, which is signed by the 1927 Yankees team. And I mean, yeah, kid, obviously great trade, but when Smalls' stepdad gets home from his business trip, he only grounds him for a week? A week? The kid went into the man's office, stole his Babe Ruth autographed baseball, and then hid it into a stranger's yard, and he got grounded for 1 week. I got grounded for a week for skipping gym class. What? And it's a very happy ending to the story. Like, him and his stepdad have this great relationship after this little pickle that he got himself into. I wonder how long he would have been grounded for if the very nice elderly blind man next door, who happened to be the owner of the dog, who happened to have this house full of baseball memorabilia, didn't give the kid a new autographed baseball to replace the one that he destroyed. What then, Bill? Huh? I guess we'll never know, because apparently Bill can be bought with just more autographs. The Sandlot did have 2 sequels, I think two. The Sandlot 2 from 2005 and then The Sandlot Heading Home from 2007. I have not seen either because I somewhat famously hate sequels, with the exception of a select few: Home Alone 2, Terminator 2, a Very Brady sequel. But the original Sandlot absolutely holds up, in my opinion. It's a great rewatch as an adult, really enjoyable, like genuinely enjoyable, both for the nostalgia factor, obviously, of remembering watching it as a kid, but also the nostalgia factor of the way that it so nicely captures the experience of being a kid. And I think it would be a really good one for kids to watch now, too. I mean, with a couple of minor things, it's, I think, kid appropriate and just very fun. And even though The Sandlot is obviously the most summery feeling of this broader category, the 90s gave us a ton of sports movies for kids. And even though obviously I wasn't the biggest sports fan, I loved so many of these movies. So I will leave you with a list today, and this is my top 5 kids sports movies of the 90s. Number 5 is Ladybugs from 1992. Oh my God, you guys, this movie is absolutely unhinged. I need to do a deep dive into this movie. It's basically Rodney Dangerfield's stand-up somehow worked into a story about a kid's soccer team with Jonathan Brandis dressed up like a little girl and Jack Haig cracking jokes. It's bonkers and incredible, and if you haven't watched it as an adult, I beg you to watch it. But fair warning, I don't know that I would watch this one with children. I'm just saying. Number 4 is Little Giants from 1994. This movie made me fall in love with Devon Sawa, who plays a blonde-haired tween, probably not teen, tween, dreamboat named Junior, who plays football. The movie is about rival Pee Wee football teams coached by rival brothers, played by Rick Moranis and Ed O'Neill. And I was fully obsessed with this movie as a kid. I haven't seen it in honestly close to 3 decades at this point, but I am absolutely certain that I would remember probably like 95% of the lines of this movie if I watched it now. Number 3 is the Disney Channel original movie Brink from 1998. Speaking of 90s crushes, the star of this movie is Eric Von Detten, who looked vaguely Devon Sawa-esque. I mean, he had that blonde kind of like boy band hair that they all had, and I definitely remember ripping out every single picture of him that I could find in Teen Beat, Tiger Beat, whatever other beat magazines that they had back in those days after this movie came out. I don't remember not a single thing about the plot of this movie, but I know that I loved it. Number 2 is The Mighty Ducks from 1992. Oh, what a classic. Emilio Estevez is forced to coach a kid's hockey team after he gets arrested for drunk driving. So on brand, honestly, for a Minnesota-based kids movie from the 90s. And if you're from Minnesota, don't come for me. I was born there, so I'm allowed to make fun of it. But anyway, The Mighty Ducks is obviously a 90s classic, and I really feel like it sort of helped launch the genre of kids' sports movies because it was so popular. It had sequels. I mean, it was a whole franchise in the 90s. It was such a thing. And it also featured a young Joshua Jackson, of course, which gave my little friends and I a whole new appreciation for the Mighty Ducks in late elementary school after Dawson's Creek came out, and we all became completely obsessed with Pacey. And number 1 is, of course, The Sandlot. I know every single line of this movie, I think. I've watched it so many times over the years. I mean, I couldn't even begin to count how many times I've watched this movie over my lifetime. It is a classic for a reason in my mind, and it will be a classic forever. 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 Okay, you get it. A lot of these, by the way, including The Sandlot, are streaming on Disney+. A lot of them were Disney movies if you're here in the US and you want to revisit them. So I hope you enjoyed this episode. As I mentioned, this will be an ongoing series throughout the summer where we're going to be talking about different summer nostalgic movies, so stay tuned for the next one. If you did enjoy this episode, I do always appreciate it if you can share it with somebody, and don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe so you never miss an episode. I'll be back on the next one. Bye!